What would you do if you had the chance to ask Pope Francis a question directly, and what if his answer was so profound that it changed your life forever? This is the story of Maria, an 8-year-old girl who asked a question that moved the world. Maria was a child like any other, full of curiosity and dreams. She lived in a small Italian town where she spent her days playing, helping her parents, and asking questions about everything around her. But there was one question that haunted her more than any other. Why does God allow children to suffer? She couldn't understand how a God so loving, whom her grandmother always spoke of with such affection, could allow so many children to go hungry, get sick, or lose their families. Maria watched the news on TV and heard adults talking about wars and disasters, and it left her confused. She wanted an answer, but no one around her seemed to know how to explain it. One day, while helping her mother tidy up the living room, Maria overheard a conversation that would change everything. Her father, holding a letter in his hand, said, "We've received an invitation to an event at the Vatican. Pope Francis will be meeting with a group of children for a special gathering." Maria nearly dropped the vase she was holding. Pope Francis? The one on TV? She could hardly believe it. In the days that followed, Maria began preparing for the big day. She chose her favorite dress, rehearsed what she would say, and most importantly, decided she would ask her question directly to the Pope. "If anyone can answer me, it's him," she thought, as she wrote down her doubts in a small notebook. On the day of the trip, Maria woke up before sunrise. She was nervous, but also filled with hope. On the way to the Vatican, she looked out the car window and watched the green hills rush by. Her mind kept circling the question she carried in her heart. Will he answer me? Will he understand? When they finally arrived at the Vatican, Maria was awestruck by the grandeur of the place. The tall walls, the immaculate gardens, and the reverent silence made her feel like she was in a special place. She held her mother's hand tightly as they walked into the hall where the gathering would take place. Inside, hundreds of children were already gathered, all eager to see Pope Francis. Maria sat in a chair in the front row, her heart pounding. She looked at the small notebook in her hands where she had written her question. Why does God allow children to suffer? The words seemed to come alive before her eyes. As she waited, Maria began to feel a knot in her stomach. What if she didn't have the courage to speak? What if the Pope didn't hear her? But then the doors opened and he entered the hall. Pope Francis smiled, waving to everyone with a simplicity that made Maria feel immediately at ease. He began to speak, his voice soft and welcoming. He shared stories about his childhood, about how he too had many questions about God and the world. "Faith isn't about having all the answers," he said, "but about trusting that God is with us, even when we don't understand." Maria listened intently, every word from the Pope echoing in her heart. She felt he was different from what she had imagined. He wasn't just a distant, imposing figure. He was someone who truly cared about people, especially children. When the Pope finished speaking, he asked if anyone would like to ask a question. Several hands went up, but Maria was the first to be noticed. One of the Pope's assistants approached and handed her a microphone. She looked at her notebook, where she had written her question, and then raised her eyes to the Pope. In a soft but determined voice, Maria asked, "Holy Father, why does God allow children to suffer?" The hall fell silent. Everyone looked at the Pope, waiting for his answer. He paused, as if deeply reflecting on the question. Then he walked over to Maria, knelt to her height, and looked directly into her eyes. "Maria, that is a very important question," he began, his voice filled with compassion. "God does not want anyone to suffer, especially children. He cries with those who cry and calls us to be his hands in the world, helping one another." Maria, felt a tear roll down her cheek. She hadn't expected such a simple yet profound answer. The Pope continued, "When we see a child suffering, it is our duty to act. God has given us the gift of love, and it is through love that we can ease the suffering of others." He then placed his hand on Maria's shoulder and said, "You are very brave for asking this question. And know that God loves you very much, and He is always by your side, even in the hardest moments." Maria couldn't hold back her tears. She felt a warmth in her chest, as if a great doubt had finally been answered. The Pope hugged her, and the entire hall erupted in applause. As the Pope stood up and continued speaking with the other children, Maria still felt his embrace, like a comfort she had never experienced before. She looked at the notebook in her hands and saw that the question that had tormented her now seemed smaller, as if it had been transformed by the Pope's answer. The next morning, Maria woke up with the feeling that something big had happened. She still felt the warmth of Pope Francis's hug, and his words echoed in her mind. But what she didn't expect was that this intimate and emotional moment would become a global phenomenon. While having breakfast with her parents, her mother's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Friends, relatives, and even strangers called to congratulate Maria and tell her they had seen her video with the Pope on social media. "Maria, you're famous," her mother said with a proud smile. Maria was surprised. She hadn't imagined that her question and the Pope's answer had been recorded and shared. When she took her mother's phone and watched the video, she felt a knot in her stomach. There she was, with her trembling voice, asking the question that had haunted her. And there was the Pope, with his answer full of compassion and love. The video spread quickly. Within hours, it had thousands of views and comments. People from all over the world shared their own stories and reflections. "This little girl asked the question we're all afraid to ask," someone wrote. "Pope Francis's answer is a comfort to everyone who has suffered," commented another. Maria was amazed by the impact. She received messages from children and adults, thanking her for her courage. Some people shared how her story had inspired them to help other children in need. Others said that, like Maria, they also had doubts about God and suffering in the world. At school, Maria was treated like a hero. Her teachers and classmates wanted to know every detail of her meeting with the Pope. She felt a little embarrassed by all the attention, but also proud to have touched so many hearts. Meanwhile, international media began covering the story. Newspapers, TV shows and websites highlighted Maria's question and Pope Francis's answer. Theologians and religious experts were invited to comment on the impact of that moment. The simplicity and depth of this little girl's question remind us that faith isn't about dogma, but about love and compassion, one of them said. Maria began to reflect on everything that was happening. She realized her question wasn't just about suffering, but also about hope and love. The Pope's answer made her understand that even in the midst of pain, there is always a way to make a difference. Inspired by this idea, Maria decided she wanted to help other children. She talked to her parents and proposed creating a project to collect food and clothes for children in need. "If God calls us to be His hands in the world, then I want to do my part," she said with determination. Her parents supported Maria's idea, and soon the project began to take shape. Friends, neighbors, and even people who had seen the video on social media offered to help. Maria was moved to see how her simple question had inspired so many people to act. Meanwhile, the video continued to spread, touching hearts and minds around the world. Maria realized that in some way she had become a messenger of hope, and though she still had many doubts, she now knew she wasn't alone. Years passed since the encounter that changed Maria's life. The project she started as a small local initiative had grown into an international organization, helping thousands of vulnerable children around the world. Maria, now a young adult, traveled constantly, sharing her story and inspiring others to act. One day, while preparing a speech for an event in her hometown, Maria paused to reflect on everything that had happened. She looked at a photo on her desk. It was her, still a child, standing next to Pope Francis, her eyes filled with tears and a shy smile. That photo was a constant reminder of how a simple question had sparked a wave of change. Maria realized that her journey wasn't just about helping others, but also about finding meaning in suffering and doubt. She had learned that the hardest questions don't always have clear answers, but it's in the search for those answers that we find purpose and connection. At the event, Maria took the stage and looked out at the audience. There were familiar faces and new ones, all there because they believed in the same cause. She began to speak, her voice filled with conviction. When I was little, I asked a question that changed my life. I wanted to know why God allows children to suffer. Today, I understand that maybe the answer isn't in explaining suffering, but in how we respond to it. She then shared stories of children who had been helped by her project, of volunteers who dedicated their lives to making a difference, and of communities that came together to support one another. Every act of love, no matter how small, is a reflection of God's love, and it's through these acts that we can transform the world. Maria ended her speech with a message of hope. No matter how small you feel or how many doubts you have, what matters is what you do with those doubts. Each of us can be a light in someone's life. Each of us can be the answer the world needs. The audience rose to their feet, applauding, and Maria felt a deep sense of gratitude. She knew her journey was far from over, but she also knew she had planted a seed that would continue to grow. As she left the stage, Maria looked up at the sky and smiled. She thought of Pope Francis, his answer full of compassion, and all the people who had crossed her path since then. "Thank you," she whispered, feeling a peace that only love and faith can bring. And so Maria's legacy continued, inspiring generations to ask difficult questions, to seek answers with love, and to be the hands of God in the world. If Maria's story moved you, and you believe in the power of questions and love to transform the world, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Give this video a thumbs up if this message touched your heart, and share it with someone who needs hope today. Oh, and don't forget to comment below. What question would you ask Pope Francis? Your voice can inspire change too.